Sanctions have been reimposed in Venezuela by the US government. However, not everything is as it seems, and today we discuss.
Welcome to Venezuela Insider, the only place in Venezuela for expats, digital nomads, entrepreneurs, investors, travelers, and related internationals. For more information, venezuelainsider.com.
So we all have heard the news that the US, the White House, especially the Treasury Department, have reimposed sanctions in Venezuela. There was an easing of sanctions since the late 2022. And the sanctions, this scheme of easing of sanctions, it was due to be revised on this year on April 18, just a few weeks ago. However, just right before that deadline, the US government issued a statement where they are, quote unquote, reimposing the sanctions against the Venezuelan economy. First, we have to explain how the sanctions scheme works. First, these particular sanctions started on 2015 during the Obama administration and were mostly against government officials, top government officials, and basically these people were not able to, their assets in the US were seized, their accounts were frozen, and they are not able to travel to the United States unless it's for a diplomatic visit. Very good. However, the big sanctions came on 2019 during the Trump administration, and these particular sanctions were against oil industry and other strategic industries regarding mining, finance, and basically government activity. These particular sanctions does not affect the Venezuelan private industries. However, in practice, they work a little bit different. Thanks to this particular process of compliance of the sanctions by international companies, let's say banks or suppliers, that in many cases, they don't want to work with Venezuelan individuals and private businesses because they don't do the due diligence, they don't want to do the due diligence, they just get some low-level, mid-level clerk that doesn't know anything about the particular sanction scheme and flat out disregard Venezuelans as clients or business partners. Now, going back to the easing of sanctions of late 2022, it was issued a license that is called the License 44 that basically allows doing business within the oil industry with the Venezuelan government and such, but with certain limitations. And basically these companies, especially US companies, they have a particular waiver, a license. Basically this license is just a fancy way of issuing a waiver for particular companies. And these particular companies can include the Spaniard Repsol, or of course the biggest one is the big oil multinational Chevron, and of course a handful of others. Now, what really happened just a few weeks ago, it was quote unquote not a reimpose on sanctions, was a replacement of this particular license, the license 2024. Now, this particular license, the license 44, has been replaced by the license 44A. That works a little bit different. And actually is more business friendly than most media are thinking or reporting. If you read this particular document of this license 44A, says that basically if a company wants to invest in Venezuela, of course I'm talking oil multinationals or very strategic big companies within Venezuela, they can do so without being affected by the sanctions of the United States, but they need to, of course, they need their particular license in order to operate, let's say, sanction-free. And the other thing is regarding what is called as a comfort letter that they have to be issued. Basically, this particular new scheme of sanctions affects only first the Venezuelan government, and this is one of the restrictions, is that multinationals and any entity abroad cannot do business with the Venezuelan government when the Venezuelan government or any public institution of the Venezuelan government has 50% or over 50% of the stake on each particular joint venture. The second group affected by this particular sanction scheme is actually the Russian Federation, specifically in this particular license, specifically says that any multinational cannot do business with a Russian entity, regardless if it's public or private, within Venezuela, and if they do so, they will be punished with U.S. sanctions. Now, how the reactions are being managed in the world right now? Well, first, the media is saying basically that the sanctions have been reimposed, that de facto has not been the case. They're going to review this particular scheme on 45 days before of being implemented, so that will be by late May or early July. But the second thing is actually on the business world, many people have been more encouraged to keep investing in Venezuela. For instance, Repsol, the big Spaniard oil company that has presence in Venezuela, just right after the sanctions, announced they are going to increase expanding their operations in Venezuela. They recently signed a deal with the Venezuelan oil company PDVSA. Also, a very particular billionaire, a Texan billionaire, so a U.S. citizen, just announced they are signing a deal with the Venezuelan government, and especially the oil industry with PDVSA. And this particular billionaire investor from Texas, he is working and investing on aging oil fields within the country. Also, recently, Vietnam authorities have announced they just already signed a deal as well with Venezuelan institutions, and they are investing not only on the oil industry, but also in another ventures within Venezuela. Trinidad and Tobago also announced they are close to get a license of their own in order to keep investing in a joint venture with the Venezuelan oil authorities. This is for developing offshore natural gas field that, of course, they have with Venezuela. This split between Venezuelan territory and Trinidad and Tobago territory. It's called the Dragon Field and seems like a very lucrative opportunity for the future. Also, the Venezuelan government has announced that over 20 international investors have visited the country right after the sanctions, by the way, in order to invest in the Venezuelan oil industry. Remember, Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world, even larger than Saudi Arabia. So still, Venezuela is very attractive despite the whole circumstances in order to keep investing in Venezuela. And last but not least, even Zara. Yes, Zara, the big fast fashion juggernaut, one of the biggest brands regarding clothing and apparel in the world, they announced that are reopening operations within Venezuela. They just a couple of weeks ago, they announced they are opening the biggest store in Latin America of this particular brand within Caracas. Now, regarding the politics, of course, we have this particular political circus that is mostly tongue-in-cheek. For one hand, we have the United States that, quote unquote, are, pushing for democracy in Venezuela with this particular easing of sanctions that is not as easy. They reimpose, quote unquote, on theory the sanctions, but in practice, they are letting many companies worldwide in order to keep further expanding their operations within Venezuela. And by the other hand, the Venezuelan governments, they can say, tongue-in-cheek, that they are, having this feud with the United States, but actually the sanctions are not as draconian as they seem to be. And basically the expansion of foreign direct investing in Venezuela, especially on the oil industry, apparently is going to get bigger in years to come. We have to remember that in the United States, this year, 2024, is an election year. And if Venezuela is reimposed, in practice, a particular draconian sanction scheme, remember that Venezuela it's not as important regarding the worldwide oil industry right now. They only produce a little bit over 800,000 barrels of crude oil. However, supply and demand, if Venezuela gets hindered their ability in order to increase their oil industry. Remember that as well, we have issues in the Middle East, in Israel, Gaza, Iran, the Houthis in Yemen, also the issue in Ukraine. So basically, there is a lot of turmoil within the Middle East and also in Eastern Europe. So that can also hinder the prices of crude oil worldwide. That will increase the price of crude oil and, of course, increase gasoline prices worldwide. That is something that the United States wants to avoid because, of course, this year is an election year and higher prices of gasoline and crude oil are going to be perceived negatively on the sentiment of the average American voter. Also, we have talked about migration. Venezuela has over 7 million migrants worldwide, and lately they are straight going to the United States. Also, there's a lot of turmoil and issues with the migration to the United States by the southern border. Also, a lot of coverage by the news, by the media, a lot of negative sentiment against migrants in the United States. So that can also hinder the re-election of Joe Biden, that is right now the president, and his poised to do a re-election, that have a successful re-election. Of course, right now the numbers are not in his favor, so he doesn't want to, the particular administration doesn't want to hinder themselves regarding the re-election, so it's on their best interest keeping the Venezuelan situation a little bit under control. So in order to sum it up, the sanctions are not going to be as draconian as most people think. License and waivers have been issued, and right now many multinationals are poised to invest in Venezuela in years to come, despite this particular sanction scheme. The only thing that affects these particular sanctions are the cash flow of the Venezuelan government on these particular schemes. They cannot directly, in many cases, are going to be able to receive straight up cash. Also, many multinationals, every multinational that doesn't want to be affected by the sanctions, they cannot do business when the Venezuelan government has over 50% of the stake of a particular joint venture, and Russian authorities and institutions also are very affected because they cannot do business with international companies and entities because they have the risk of being sanctioned themselves. So basically that covers everything regarding what you need to know about sanctions, at least for this particular year. If any update comes up regarding the sanction scheme, of course, you're going to hear it through this particular platform.
Thank you for watching Venezuela Insider. Please like, share, and subscribe. Follow us on social media. If you want to work with us, VenezuelaInsider.com. Thanks again and have a nice day.